This segment is brought to you by Rouse's Markets. Feels like home. Hello again, everyone, and welcome to Bayou Time. I'm Martin Falls. Well, of course, Senator John Kennedy visited Thibodaux here at Thibodaux Regional Medical Center. He had a packed crowd, and he spoke for roughly 20-25 minutes, and then he fielded questions. And then, of course, we got to do a pretty good interview with him. But let's listen in. First of all, we'll do the speech in 3 segments. We'll come back with some of the audience questions, and then I'll have some questions for him. Then we'll compile them all together for Facebook and YouTube. So without further ado, Senator John Kennedy.
It is great to be home. And it's great to be down the bayou. You would have to see it from the inside to understand how deeply weird Washington is. In Washington, D.C., normal is a setting on the dryer. You know, sometimes, you've heard me say this before, sometimes when I feel inadequate, and I do, I just look around. I mean, common sense is illegal. I love coming back home, down the bayou. My people, our people, you people, you're real, you're authentic. You love beer, bacon, crawfish, breakfast food, straight answers, hard work, hunting, fishing, football. I love coming home. And I want to thank you for having me. And as George Bush used to say, I want to thank all of you who waved with all 5 fingers. Sometimes that doesn't happen. Yeah, I can't help but coming down the bayou that I don't think about the first election I ever ran. I lost. I ran for Attorney General in 1990. And one of the first people I called for financial help was the late Clifford Smith. God, what a fine man. You know, whip smart. I called, loved the environment, built a great company from nothing. But I remember calling Clifford, and I said, Clifford, I'm running for Attorney General. Would you send me $5,000 to help my campaign? And I'll never forget what Clifford said. He said, Kennedy, I will not send you $5,000 to run for Attorney General. I said, okay. He said, I will send you $5,000 to see a psychiatrist. I love Clifford. It's great to be here with all our elected and appointed officials. I don't want to single anybody out, but especially our legislators with whom I work closely. You know, Louisianians believe in justice, but every now and then we send an innocent man to the legislature, and women, and some of them are here today, and I want to thank them for their good work. I've got a few staff members I want to recognize too. I couldn't do my job without their help. With me today is Ross White, my Deputy Chief of Staff. There's Ross. Carolyn Theriot, who you see her more than you see me probably. Chris Rosado. Chris and I have traveled the world together. He gets me to places where I'm supposed to be on time, and I want to thank them for their good work. I want to spend just a couple of minutes, and then I want to leave plenty of time for questions. We can talk about anything you want to talk about. Anything you want to talk about. I want to talk about the reconciliation bill, the so-called one big, beautiful bill. There's been so much information and misinformation put out on this, so I wanted to try to spend a few minutes before I take your questions setting the record straight. I won't bore you with the details, but we call this a reconciliation bill because once a year, the majority party in Congress is entitled to pass a bill under the Budget Control Act in the Senate without requiring 60 Senate votes. We can do it with 51. And that's important because it is, when we pass legislation, we on the Republican side of the aisle, under what we call regular order, we've got to get 10 Democratic votes, and that's pretty hard to do. But once a year, we can do a reconciliation bill and under the Budget Control Act and pass it with 51 votes. And that's what the so-called one big beautiful bill was all about. It just took 51 votes. President Biden did the same thing when he was president. You may remember the Inflation Reduction Act, the American Rescue Plan, neither of which I voted for. But President Biden was able to pass those bills with 51 votes. Every time I look at this bill, and it is an expansive piece of legislation. It's breathtaking in its scope. Every time I look at it, and it takes me a week to read it, you could stand on the thing and paint the ceiling. But it's going to have an extraordinary impact on our country and on Louisiana. The first thing we did in this bill was extend the 2017 tax cuts that we passed. They were about to expire at the end of this year. Now, had we not extended those tax cuts, and everyone who voted against this bill voted to allow those taxes to continue, it would have raised taxes in the amount of $4.3 trillion on the American people. $4.3 trillion. It would have tanked our economy. Our economy in Louisiana and America would have gone down like a fat guy on a seesaw. Louisiana alone, it would have increased taxes on average for every Louisianian, and this is an average, $2,135. It would have cost us $76,000. It would have reduced our state gross domestic product by $15 billion. It would have been devastating. So we extended those tax cuts, and most of them we made permanent. And you just sit back and watch the American economy roar once this legislation kicks in. But we did a lot of other stuff. We cut taxes on tips. We cut taxes on Social Security. We cut taxes on overtime. We provided a deduction for automobile loans for a certain segment of Americans. We increased the standard deduction. You'll see that immediately on your taxes. We continued the 20% deduction for small businesses. Those of you who operate out of LLCs and sub-S corporations know what I'm talking about. My Democratic friends wanted to get rid of that 20% deduction. We continued it. We introduced school choice tax credits. Isn't talked about much, but it's going to have a huge impact. We expanded the 529 College Savings Program. I hope some of you are familiar with that. We allowed our businesswomen and businessmen to fully expense research and development and purchases of new equipment and machinery. What does that mean? Well, normally, those of you in business, when you buy new equipment, new machinery, build a new factory, you have to depreciate it, deduct it over a long period of time. This year, now you'll be able to deduct it immediately. Huge impact on the amount of taxes we pay. We increased the excise tax on the endowments of some of our wealthy universities. We did. Not all universities are going to have to pay. But when you're a university with a $50 billion endowment, returning $5 to $10 billion a year tax-free, to teach kids to hate. We just didn't think that was fair. We ended federal payments out of Medicaid for abortion and for sex change operations. We increased the state tax exemption. That's important for some folks in this room. We increased it to $15,000 a person, made it permanent, indexed it to inflation. We increased the exemption for family farms. I can continue, I'll just mention a couple of others. President Biden passed a number of green energy tax credits. They punished the hell out of fossil fuels, but they loaded us up on the green energy. We didn't eliminate all of them, but we eliminated some of them. The electric vehicle tax credit is gone. Some of you have heard me say Americans should be able to choose what kind of car they want to drive. If they want to drive an electric vehicle, more power to them. But the government shouldn't make you. If you want to drive a gasoline-powered car, the government should allow you to do that. We have a whole lot more gasoline-powered cars than we do electric vehicles, and we will for a long, long time, maybe forever. We need fossil fuels. My car doesn't run off pixie dust and unicorn urine. It takes oil and gas, so we address that issue as well. We reformed the food stamp program. We improved Go Mesa. You know what I'm talking about with Go Mesa. We're going to bring in an extra $150 million a year through Go Mesa to the Louisiana Gulf states, including but not limited to Louisiana, to try to combat coastal erosion. Wasn't as much as I wanted, but I was happy to get the extra $150 million a year. We're going to require the Department of Interior to hold 30 offshore lease sales in the Gulf over the next 15 years. President Biden had practically shut them down, and we're going to refill the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. We set aside $2 billion for that.
We'll take a short break. We'll be right back more with the Senator. Don't go away. This segment was brought to you by Rouse's Markets. Feels like home. And welcome back to Bayou Time. We'll reconvene now as Senator John Kennedy addressing a large crowd here in Thibodaux.
What I really want to talk about, though, and let me say it again, this bill is breathtaking in scope, and I am so proud of it. And you will immediately see the impact, and the American economy will immediately see the impact. I have believed, as long as I can remember, that people can spend their money better than government can, and they can. This country was made great. It's an extraordinary country not because of government. It's an extraordinary country because of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Extraordinary things. And this bill is going to get some government off people's backs. Now I want to address one of the falsehoods before I take questions. One of the lies you've heard, and that is that this bill is going to hurt Medicaid. You've read it. Congressional Budget Office has talked about it. The national media talks about it. They say it's going to throw 10.5 million people off Medicaid. Well, let me tell you the other side of the story. I don't know how many people are going to lose their Medicaid. Some people will. But everyone who loses their Medicaid, listen to me on this. Everyone who loses their Medicaid under this bill was not entitled to it in the first place. They weren't entitled to it in the first place. I looked at a report the other day. I mean, that's what they don't tell you. I looked at a report the other day. We have about 90 million people on Medicaid. That's including CHIP, about 90 million people. Since 2019, our spending is up 51%. 51%. We're spending almost $1 trillion a year on Medicaid. When you drill down and see who's getting Medicaid, I'll give you a few examples. We have found 2.8 million people who are double dipping. In other words, they sign up in Louisiana and they run over and sign up in Mississippi. And Mississippi and Louisiana don't talk to each other. Or they sign up for Medicaid in Louisiana and then they run over and sign up for Obamacare, which gets a federal tax subsidy, and double dip that way. You're not allowed to cheat. That costs us $150 billion over 10 years. So yeah, those people are going to lose their Medicaid. They weren't entitled to it in the first place. Eligibility. Now, President Biden, one of the reasons for the increase in Medicaid, President Biden virtually cut out all eligibility determinations. In other words, he told the states that when somebody presents and says, I'm qualified for Medicaid, you just take their word for it. Now, I think most Americans are truthful. I think most people are truthful. I play poker with friends sometimes. They're all friends, but you know what? I always cut the cards. I believe in the old adage, trust in God, but tie up your camel. That's just common sense. Some people lie to get Medicaid. They make too much money. The legislative auditor did a report for us in Louisiana a few years ago. He found that our Louisiana Department of Health and Hospitals spends $85.5 million in Medicaid payments a year to people who aren't eligible. A year. The legislative auditor also did another report. He couldn't go through every single Medicaid recipient. So he did what's called a statistical sample. And through a statistical sample, he found 1,600 people, just a small sample, on our Medicaid rolls in Louisiana who were making over $100,000 a year. I mean, I've got the list right here. Here it is. Here's one person who's making $111,785. Another person signed up for Medicaid, $126,284. Another $89,964. Another $86,705. We're going to stop that. We're going to require states to check for eligibility twice a year. And we're going to require the agencies in a state that administer Medicaid to actually talk to the agency in the state that collects taxes. We're going to have the computers talk to each other. So if you're making $120,000 a year, we're going to throw you off Medicaid. That's cheating. And yes, those people are going to lose Medicaid. They weren't entitled to it in the first place. Now, let me tell you one other thing we did. We implemented a work requirement. The American people, look, the American people are the most generous people in the world. We help our neighbors. Not in other countries. I've been all over the world. In some countries, you get down on your luck, you can die in a ditch. In America, we spend trillions of dollars a year helping our less fortunate. And our country If you're hungry, we feed you. If you're homeless, we'll house you. If you're too poor to be sick, we'll pay for your doctor. But folks, this is not free. You hear people all talk all the time of free, free, free. Anything free, somebody worked for. This is extraordinarily expensive. And according to The Economist, we have found that about 6 million people who received Medicaid could work but choose not to work. And let me tell you what I'm talking about. Medicaid originally was for the very poor, for the disabled, for young pregnant mothers. And then under President Biden and President Obama, it was expanded. That's how it has grown to almost 90 million Americans. And some of the people on Medicaid can work but choose not to work. It's just a fact. According to The Economist, we have about 6 million people that we know of who are receiving Medicaid. They're healthy, they're able-bodied, they don't have young children at home, and they just choose not to work and to get free Medicaid. We're going to put a stop to that. Under the new rule, if you're from 19 to 64 years old and you're not disabled, you're healthy. So we're not talking now about a young mother with a sick child in her arms. You're healthy, your kids are all grown, they have to be 14 years or older. You're going, we'll give you Medicaid, but you've got to go work or go back to school or perform community service 80 hours a month. If you don't want to, that is your business, but you're not going to get Medicaid. Those people who choose not to work, but who can work, will lose their Medicaid. They're not eligible for it. Nobody's being thrown off. We're just giving you a choice. Try to go get a job. We'll help you. A person without a job is not healthy, he's not happy, and he's not free. Those who can work should work. Again, the American people are the most generous in the world. But these programs like Medicaid and food stamps and the Earned Income Tax Credit, they were meant to be bridges, not parking lots. You know, I don't want to take away, I want to take money from people who use and need food stamps. I want fewer people to need food stamps, and the best way to that is to get a job. And it is a cold, hard, cruel fact. I'm not talking about everybody on Medicaid. I'm not. So don't quote me out of context. But when you've got 6 million, I think it's probably more people who receive Medicaid and choose not to work, well, sometimes, not always, but sometimes the best way to get back on your feet is to get off your ass.
Don't go away. Another segment coming up on Bayou Time. Senator John Kennedy in Thibodaux, Louisiana. This segment was brought to you by Cardiovascular Institute of the South, providing our patients the highest quality cardiovascular care available. And welcome back. We'll wrap up with Senator John Kennedy in Thibodaux. I had a chance also to speak with him. So right after his closing comments, listen in as I asked him a few pertinent questions about the area. And let's now go back to the senator. So
when you hear all this business about, well, the Republicans are throwing people off Medicaid and they're cold-hearted and they're a bunch of ignorant sluts and they don't like people and all that kind of stuff, I want you to know that the people who are going to lose their Medicaid are not eligible for it in the first place. And in fact, if you look at the numbers under the One Big Beautiful Bill, Medicaid is actually going to go up 20% over the next 10 years. I don't want to end on a negative note. I'm an optimist. I believe that America's and Louisiana's future can be better than our present or our past. I believe that. I believe that we're only as good as our dreams, and that we're only as valuable as our children. But I'm not going to bubble wrap it, folks. The water in Washington, D.C. is not going to clear up until you get the pigs out of the creek. And that's just a fact. And I've seen them. All 4 feet and their snout in the trough. And nobody's coming to save us but ourselves. I hope you'll help me fight for our state and our country. You know, so many of the Washington elites, they call us deplorables. Or smelly Walmart shoppers. I love Walmart. They think we're not real people, but we are real people. And we need to get real mad. We need to get real mad. Look, I don't know how my story's going to end. Well, I guess none of us do. I'm going to serve in the United States Senate until I drop dead or my people tell me to come home. But I'll tell you this, regardless of how my story ends, nobody will ever say Kennedy quit. You honor me with this invitation. Thank you for having me. I'll be pleased to answer and talk about anything you want to talk about, including that new Gene commercial. That's pretty cool. Thank you.
You and Senator Cassidy and 8 other senators sent a letter to the acting administrator of FEMA asking him to just basically terminate risk rating 2.0. So it's basically going toward the administration. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on what you think can happen there. And then we're also working with your staff on some legislation that might be in an approach rider. But I know you've been fighting, and I wanted everybody in this room to know how hard you've been fighting on it, but you know, Louisiana is disproportionately impacted, and it's hard to get the rest of the nation's attention on this. But thanks for what you've done, and I was hoping you could comment.
Okay. Well, what good does it do to provide people the opportunity to purchase insurance if it's so high they can't afford it? And that's what we've got. The flood insurance program, the private markets are getting better, but as you know, in order to buy flood insurance, you got to get it from the federal government. And the program's run by FEMA. And I am so pissed at FEMA. I'm as mad as a murder hornet. I mean, they won't even meet me anymore to talk about it. About, I don't know how many years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, FEMA, this is the risk rating 2.0, decided they were going to revamp the flood insurance program and how they compute rates. Okay. So they did it, and rates were just exploding. They gave us some weird statistics that said, well, 80% of the people will see decreases. When donkeys fly, 80% of the people saw increases. So I called them to my office and I said, explain this to me. And they said, well, we hired an outside consultant. And they came up with this new algorithm. And this algorithm, it can look at your individual home, not your area where you live, but your individual home, and look out 30 years and predict whether that property is going to flood. I said, man, that's pretty extraordinary. Can I see the algorithm? I'm going to hire somebody to go through it. And they said, oh, no. If we showed it to you, we'd have to kill you. And that's where it's been since then. I called the Biden White House. They're the only ones who could fix it. And, you know, it was like, you know, it was like talking to the wind. So what we've done, the banking committee, I sit on the banking committee. I sit on the appropriations committee, the banking committee, the judiciary committee, the budget committee. I used to sit on the small budget committee, business committee, but I had to give it up. It was just too much. And believe me, Louisiana's taken care of. I sit on the appropriations committee. My job is to collect all the requests from all of my colleagues. And together, all of us, we brought billions of dollars to the state. I don't talk about it that much. But I never ask for a penny more than we need, but I never accept a penny less than we deserve. And my colleagues know that. But I sit on banking, and banking has the authority to deal with flood insurance. And Senator Scott, who's the chairman from South Carolina, who's the chairman of banking, myself and Mike Rounds, Senator Mike Rounds, we had our third or fourth meeting the other day. We're going to try to redesign the flood insurance program that looks like somebody designed the damn thing on purpose. Now, we're not there yet, and once we do it, we got to go get 60 votes. But the good news is this time we've got President Trump in the White House, and I've talked to him about it, and he's sympathetic. What else?
Congress is going to pass a balanced budget. We've been working on continuing resolutions for several years, and there's always talk saying there's going to be a budget, but we haven't had one yet. So I was just curious what's going on with that.
The question is, when will Congress pass a balanced budget? Remember a few minutes back I said when donkeys fly? Look, that's why I wish you could see it from the inside. This is true of all Democrats who are my friends. I don't hate anybody. I really don't. But it's also true of most Republicans, despite what they say. We have $37 trillion in debt. And that's real debt. We got to pay it back, folks. We ought to change the name of the Department of Treasury. We ought to call it the Department of Debt, because there's no treasure there. And we're adding on to that. This year we'll take in probably $4 to $5 trillion. We'll spend 7 to 8. In that gap, we got to go borrow money from the world. That's why we issue Treasury bonds and Treasury notes and Treasury bills. The favorite, it really got bad under President Biden. President Biden's favorite form of spending was more. If President Biden had discovered life on Mars, he would have immediately sent it money. So it really got bad. And now we've got to do better. I'll tell you a quick story. About my third meeting when I was on the Appropriations Committee, I think we were just about or had passed the tax cuts of 2017. I knew short term they would add to the deficit. Long term they would decrease it because the economy would be stimulated. But I said, I made a motion, and there are like 30-something members of the Appropriations Committee. And I made a motion. I said, we just passed these tax cuts. This year, we need to reduce the spending. This year, we ought to eliminate this forget what it was, 3 to 4% increase on federal employee salaries. Okay? Silence in the room. So I made the motion. Got a second. I looked around, I asked for a roll call vote, and all of a sudden, every one of my colleagues, all the Democrats, but all the Republicans, they have an important message on their phone. I got 2 votes. My vote and the vote of a senator from Mississippi. So in Washington, D.C., despite what you hear, well, let me put it this way. Everybody in Washington wants to go to heaven, but they're just not quite ready to take the trip. That's what cutting spending is like. For the first time in 9 years, we just cut spending. Thank you, President Trump. Thank you, Russ Vought at the OMB. He sent over a rescissions package, and we cut $10 billion. A baby step, but a meaningful step. And I'm convinced that we will forget about balanced budget. Every year, we just keep spending more and more money. And there really is no appetite to stop it. Don't get me started. What you do when in Washington, forget about what people say. Watch what they do. What they do is what they believe, and everything else is just cottage cheese, man. So the only way we're going to reduce spending is for the White House to send us over what's called a rescission package. And the White House sent us the first one, and I've asked the president to keep them coming. And what the rescission package does, it says, look, we found this money in the budget that's bone deep, down to the marrow, stupid. I call it spending porn. And he says, I want you to rescind it. And we did. The last one was, I think, $10 billion, $11 billion. And that's the only way we're going to achieve it. I wish I had better news. But I'm going to keep fighting for it. And there are other folks on my side. Rick Scott from Florida has been a champion. Rand Paul has been a champion. Roger Marshall from Kansas, but we're outnumbered. We are not going to get control of our debt and help our economy until we relearn the magical healing power of no. We just can't fund everything. Yes, ma'am.
What are your thoughts on reducing the deficit with the possibility of selling government assets or even increasing government employers' contribution to their benefits, like health insurance, where they only pay 25%, or even their retirement plans? Just your thoughts.
To answer your first question first, remember when I said we spend $7 trillion, take in $5 trillion? Well, to finance the gap, we have to issue treasury bills, treasury bonds, treasury notes. And basically that's where the Department of Treasury goes out there to the world and says, we need to borrow money. We will sell you a treasury, let's say a 10-year treasury, and we'll pay you X% interest. And you know, because it's the United States of America, you'll get your principal back. And that's worked for a long, long, long time. Why? Because not only is the United States of America the greatest country in all of human history, we have the most powerful economy in all of human history. And we've never defaulted on these treasury bonds or treasury notes. And people are continuing to buy those treasuries and loan us money. But if you notice what's happening, they're starting to demand more in interest. And that's key. Because our interest bill keeps going up, up, up. We now spend more on interest than we do on spending at the Department of Defense. And it's only going to get worse. And that's what the Trump administration and some of us in Congress are trying to address. We're looking at everything, as you know from the papers. One of them is our personnel costs. A study was done a few years ago, the average federal employee, comparing job to job, I think this was done by the GAO, this study, makes 17% more job, comparing public sector job to the same job in the private sector. The public sector employee makes about 17% more, including benefits, than a person in the private sector. We'd like to get that down to even. The federal employees don't like it, and I understand that. But it got so bad under President Biden. Federal employees weren't coming to work. You would go over to the Department of Environmental Protection and walk around. It was empty as a bill collector's heart, man. There's nobody there. And you go, where is everybody? Oh, they're working from home. They're working from home. And now they're back to work now. But we're just chipping away at it. My plan to do it is to basically reduce it through attrition. We have a big turnover. And when a vacancy comes up, just don't fill it. And tell those back at the office, your managers, tell the managers, manage, reorganize so we don't need that person. And that way we'll get the cost down. but we got to do it. Yes, sir.
You know, people don't realize this, but years ago, when we formed the CPRA, and we have 300 and something employees over there. You know, we were directed by the federal government to put it together so that the federal government felt comfortable sending us money to the state that it would go to the proper areas after Katrina. How many different divisions of permitting do we possibly need? And every time we deal with the Corps of Engineers, it takes 5 to 10 years to get something out the other end, and then it's double and triple the cost. And I just hope if there's any place that DOGE ought to show up, it ought to be over there to see how ridiculous. And look, I'm not a fan of the Corps. It's been a while too. I mean, it's ridiculous how they spend taxpayers' dollars, or don't spend it and don't put it on the ground, but spend it in the environmental department, where they always claim they're understaffed and underpaid, and we have all these employees at CPRA that can do that instead of the Corps. They ought to be in charge of navigation in the Mississippi River, and we can get some work on the ground instead of them holding on to the money that you allocated, that you appropriated for us to put on the ground. And I think one of your comments was, why would I appropriate more money to you guys, right? Because you can't spend the $400 million they have on Morganza. It's just getting ridiculous, and we've talked about it, and what's in the process. Where does it stand?
Well, the Corps, we've got a new sheriff and new Corps officials and a new director of civil works. Corps got to do better. I have a pretty good relationship with the Corps. Maybe that's because I'm in charge of their budget. But I prefer, rather than beating them up publicly, to try to work with them privately.
I've tried that.
I know, Tony. And they need to do better, and they know they need to do better. And sooner or later, our DOGE efforts to reorganize and streamline will get to them. And I've had a very frank talk with them about that. And they say they'll do better. But this is a problem not just in the Corps, it's all across the federal government. The rules and regulations are just breathtaking. The rules and regulations cost the American consumer probably $2 trillion a year. That's how much compliance with all these rules and regulations, like the Corps and but others, add to the costs of goods and services. And we're trying to do something. We're trying to do something about that. So you make a very valid point, and I can't argue with it. That's one of the problems with the flood insurance program too, by the way.
Senator Kennedy,
Yes, sir.
thank you for all you do for us here in Louisiana. Keep up the good work. We don't hear too much about drill, baby, drill. What's going on?
We're drilling, baby, drilling. Now, you don't hear much about it. The media doesn't like to talk about it. But we put provisions in the reconciliation bill, the so-called One Big Beautiful Bill, to require, not ask, require lease sales in the Gulf. That's going to help get us started. We're expanding production in Alaska. We're expanding production in the shale oil states, one of which is Louisiana. We can't make oil companies drill, and of course, how much they spend in capital expenditures and drilling is determined a lot by the price of oil. So, and oil is down now. That's a double-edged sword. It's good for us who use oil to make products like our petrochemical industry, and it's good for us who drive gasoline-powered cars. But it's bad for us in terms of exploration. But I know Chris Wright, the new head of the Department of Energy, very well. I knew him when he was in the private sector back in Colorado. And Chris is not anti-renewable energy. He's pro all forms of energy. He's not against wind or solar, but he thinks they ought to stand on their own 2 feet without having to be subsidized. He also believes, and I do too, that we need to take advantage of other forms of energy that is accessible, and so long as it's affordable. Oil and gas, especially natural gas, geothermal, hydropower. Hydrogen, go down the list. Under the last administration, because of its emphasis on the Green New Deal and it's punishing oil and gas companies, the average electricity bill in America went up 28%. 28%. And it's going to get worse unless we do something, because you have all these new AI data centers coming on board. We've got a new one coming here in Louisiana, and they're energy hungry. What else? Yes, sir.
In the news, you hear about the appointments that the president has on hold. What is the status as far as things in confirmation as expected, or do you think he'll make a lot of recess appointments?
Well, my Democratic friends are acting like butt heads. You know, every president, any president, has to appoint about 1,200 people. And the Senate, I like to say, we're in the personnel business as well as everything else. We have to confirm those under the Constitution. And before President Trump's second term, the custom had always been for President Biden, for President Obama, for President Bush, going all the way back since, I don't know, God was a child, going way back. The custom had been the Republicans would sit down with the Democrats, and we would compile 2 lists. The lists of nominees that we were going to have a fight over, like, you know, Attorney General, that's an important job, and the list of nominees that frankly, nobody cared about. I mean, the Deputy Assistant Secretary to the General Counsel of the Department of Defense. It's an important job, but it's not controversial. So the Dems would get together with the Rs, and we would agree to voice vote those. And that way we could spend our time on the really important nominations. And that's not just important because of the number of votes. Every minute we spend fighting over nominations, we can't pass legislation. Well, Senator Schumer has ended that courtesy. Senator Schumer, let me say it again, I don't hate anybody. I really don't. I look for grace wherever I can find it, and I don't hate Senator Schumer. I don't. I tell him, he reminds me sometime of a 5-year-old in a Batman costume. You know, he's running around like this, and of course he's got Senator Ocasio-Cortez breathing down his neck politically in New York. But he just said, I'm going to fight, and not agree to any of these confirmations. We make you go through what's called regular order. It takes us a day and a half through motions to proceed and cloture votes to confirm every one of these. And that's shut down the Senate. Let's just shut it down. We're spending all our time on confirmations. So we're looking at a rule change. I don't know if we'll do it. I hate to do it. But I don't know what to do to make Chuck cooperate. And I don't think he's going to cooperate. And that's what's really going on. Yeah, Ross? One more. Y'all got a Sidney Sweeney one? No, I'm just kidding. Yes, sir.
Any revelations regarding the news from Pam Bondi and the Russiagate?
No. They've got a grand jury convened. Here's what I know on 2 fronts. Let me talk about Epstein first. Okay. Here's the way I look at it. It's one person's opinion. Epstein was a pig. P-I-G, pig. And this is no country for creepy old men. It's not. Now, this guy trafficked for sex young women, many of whom were minors. He did it. And the American people want to know, and they're entitled to know, who, if anyone, he trafficked those young women to besides himself. And I don't know how, the president has turned that issue over to the Department of Justice. And Pam Bondi's a friend of mine, but I've told her, I don't know how you're going to do that. And I'm not going to tell you how to do your job. But you're not going to be able to tell the American people anymore. Trust me, there's nobody else. You're going to have transparency and full disclosure. Now, that's my position. And I'm not going to back up. And some of the people in the White House, not the president, he's never should have worked with me, but some of the people in the White House, they're not happy with my position. They just want this to go away. But it's not going away. The American people may not read Aristotle every day. They're too busy earning a living, but they're not stupid. And they want to know, and they're entitled to know. Now, we're going to get to the bottom of Russiagate. Here's what happened, and I watched this happen. Watch this happen. Secretary Clinton's campaign manufactured false evidence about President Trump. You remember the Steele dossier, the so-called P-tape? That came, we have traced it back, directly from Secretary Clinton's campaign. And somehow, and we're going to find out how, she convinced the CIA and the FBI, with the help of James Comey and Brennan, and that other snapperhead's name, who I can't remember, that it was real. They knew better. They knew it was a lie. They knew it was political propaganda. But they leaked it and went to the media, and the media jumped on board. The media sucked it up like a Hoover Deluxe. And all of a sudden, it started as Russia interfered in the election. And then they quickly moved into Trump colluded with Russia in altering the election. Remember that? For 3.5 years, it was a feeding frenzy. And then, oopsie friggin' daisy, the Mueller report came out and said it's a lie. And we're going to get to the bottom of how it all started. And I don't know. But more and more of the formerly classified, now unclassified documents are coming out. And it's not pretty for Mr. Brennan or Mr. Comey or some of these other cast of characters. Well, folks, that's great. Thank you. Thank you for having me. God bless you.
Senator, I don't know where to start. You answered so many questions up there, but I guess I could play off of some of the local stuff as far as Go Mesa monies and flood insurance and all. If the big, beautiful bill wouldn't have passed, what would this room, you were able to peruse the room and see who was in this room, what would it have done to the local economy?
Well, if we hadn't have passed the one big, beautiful bill, it would have tanked the Louisiana economy, our economy down the Bayou, and the American economy. It'd have gone down like a fat guy on a seesaw. Just in Louisiana, the average Louisianian, just the average, some more, would have seen a $2,100 tax increase. It would have cost us probably 75,000 jobs. It would have cost our economy about $15 billion. Every person who voted against our bill was voting to raise taxes by $4.3 trillion. So But the good news is we passed it. We passed it by one vote, but we got it passed, and we worked on it for 2 months, and I'm really happy.
I know you spoke about the flood insurance issue, and people in this area are really reeling. They're having a lot of them have relocated from Terrebonne to Lafourche, and I know you're working on it, but will we see any kind of relief pretty soon?
Well, look, flood insurance costs too much. What good does it do for the federal government to offer us flood insurance if nobody can afford it? That's just stupid. FEMA is responsible. They started this risk rating 2.0. I have a bill that we're drafting now, along with Senator Scott, Senator Rounds, Senator Cassidy, which will go through the banking committee, on which I sit on, to try to reform it and fix it. But there's no guarantee I can pass it. To pass it, I've got to get 60 votes in the Senate, which means I've got to convince every Republican and 10 of my Democrats. And the problem, Martin, is that a lot of states, they don't flood. And so I've got to go make them understand how important this is to the states that do have a problem with flood. But it along with homeowners insurance and automobile insurance, we're all insurance poor. I mean, I looked at just what I paid the other day. All of my insurance bills are up probably 2.5 times what they were 5 years ago.
I used to be able to turn on YouTube, find you right on the top headlines, or find Steve Scalise or anybody, and check out what y'all were doing. I watched you regular. Now when I put it on YouTube, I got to go through an abundance of Epstein YouTube stories first. I got to go through an abundance of Russiagate. I guess my question, because you addressed that to the audience, how much time do you have to deal with that crap every day, and how much does that take away from what you really want to be doing?
Well, it takes a lot of time. When I leave a committee hearing or walk over to the Senate floor or walk off the Senate floor, they're never less than, 20 to 50 reporters and cameras. And they're like stray dogs. Once you feed them, you can't get rid of them. But you have to talk to them because they're going to write their story, and you got to get your licks in. And lately, all they want to talk about is Epstein or Sydney Sweeney, and is her ad racist? I don't get that part. I don't see anything racist about it. They want to talk about Russiagate, which I'm happy to talk about those things, but it is a distraction because you'd rather talk about Medicaid, you'd rather talk about flood insurance program, you'd rather talk about how to create jobs, what we can do about inflation, but the media is the media, and now, of course, social media is part of it.
Well, it's good seeing you again. How you holding up?
Still watch your show, Martin.
They do.
They just love your pretty face, man.
I don't know. It's getting older, though, you know?
Yeah, but you're still pretty, man.
Oh, thank you. So how are you holding up?
I'm holding up good. I love the job. You know, it takes a big heart, a lot of wind, and a thick skin. And you know, I don't get to see my family enough, and I sure don't get to see my home enough. By that I mean Louisiana. But I'm back for a couple of weeks, and I'm catching up on my sleep and my exercise, and I'm gonna do a little fishing and eat some good food. That food in Washington, it tastes like cardboard marinated in fishbowl water, man. Well, they don't know how to cook like Louisianians.
Come see us. Come have some coffee with us.
Thank you, man.
All right,
Good to see you.
Well, that wraps it up here in Thibodaux with cameraman Jason Serenier. I'm Martin Foss. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you on another episode. And don't forget, watch this entire segment on Facebook and YouTube. This segment was brought to you by Alford & Associates for all of your insurance needs.